Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the first workshop of the year called Criminalizing Survival that will be hosted and facilitated by Angel Parker. And before we begin, just to introduce ourselves and the PDSA team and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office at CSSW, my name is Ashley. I am a second year student um, specializing in clinical practice, and I am one of the co-PDSA coordinators with John Louis, and I'm super excited to be providing this workshop on behalf of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. So we have our staff members, Chris and Dean Lowe, Dean Karma here as well. So if you want to wave and just say hello, that would be great. And I'm gonna pass the mic off to John Louis, and then we'll be introducing you to our community justice co-caucus leaders Abby and Sanjana. After that, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming today. Again, we're just so excited to have this event go on, and we hope that you all enjoy as well. You can go ahead and pass it on to Sanjana and Abby. By the way, I am a second year student focusing on the policy track.
Hi, my name is Sanjana. I use they and she pronouns, and I'm one of the caucus chairs for the Community Engagement and Justice Caucus. It's a bit of a long name. I'm also a second year student on the clinical track with a concentration in contemporary social issues. I'll pass it on to Abby really quickly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abby. My pronouns are they and she. And as Sanjana said, we're the Community Engagement and Justice Caucus, formerly known as the Criminal Justice Caucus. And we are so thankful and excited to be here today. Thank you so much, PDSA, for inviting us to collaborate with you on this event. So I guess we wanted to mention why we're so excited to be here, and in light of the renaming from Criminal Justice Caucus to Community Engagement and Justice Caucus, the renaming was in light of our recognition that abolition has to happen in so many different areas that are not just the legal system and in mass incarceration. Excuse me. And so we just wanted to say that we're so thankful to be here, and and talk about how all of these systems intersect, and also centering survivors in this work is so important. So thank you.
All right, so last but not least, we will pass the floor off to Angel, who is coming here to host this really meaningful and valuable workshop called Criminalizing Survival. And so please give a round of applause to Angel. Yay.
Hi, y'all. Thank y'all for doing the little intros in the chat. I just wanted to get a feel for who is in the audience. So to start, before we really start, I just want to offer a trigger warning. We're gonna be talking about some heavy stuff. So abuse, prison, captivity, family separation, things that are very sensitive. So I invite y'all to take care of yourself in whatever way feels most appropriate. So if that's stepping away, logging out, logging back on, whatever you need to do to make yourself feel comfortable in the space, I invite you to do that. So I am Angel, Angel Parker. I use she, her pronouns. As y'all know, I'm an organizer with Survived and Punished. For those who are unfamiliar with Survived and Punished, we are an abolitionist organization. We are the New York chapter, so we're based out of New York City. And we work with survivors of gender-based violence or domestic violence who are incarcerated throughout upstate New York prisons. And our work is divided into 4 categories. So anti-prosecution, which is the group I am in. We focus on predatory prosecutorial tactics that are used against survivors. We have mutual aid and commissary, our newsletter that we send in to our inside members, and we also have mass commutations group, which focuses on pressuring Governor Cuomo to give clemency to survivors. I also am a senior counselor with Steps to End Family Violence, which some of y'all may be familiar with. We usually do have Columbia student interns, but not this year. But I'm with the Criminalized Survivors Program. So I offer weekly counseling and legal advocacy to survivors. Prior to the COVID shutdown, I was working out of Rikers every week, but because of the shutdown, we're doing more like virtual, like video conferencing with people who are on the inside and working with survivors who are out on bail. So that's a little bit about me. So these are like the objectives for today. I essentially just want to introduce y'all to some basic concepts, familiarize you all with some of the dynamics that contribute to survivors being criminalized, and specifically to get y'all thinking about like your role as social workers in this carceral system. So some other things to note is I try not to use gendered language throughout the presentation, but there may be times where I use gendered language. But I do want to note when I use a term such as woman, for example, that term is inclusive of trans women, of cis women, and everyone that identifies as women. So for example, and also going to be utilizing the stack feature, which is what we use at Survived and Punished. So that means that if you feel like compelled to speak, if you don't want to use a chat and you want to speak, you type in stack in the chat like this, and then you will be put on stack. Someone will call on you and then you can speak. So I'm definitely down to answer questions and comments throughout the presentation. There'll also be some time at the end as well. So oh, and finally, I want to give thanks and solidarity to the Lenape people whose land I am currently occupying, and those who are in New York City are also likely occupying. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat, and I invite y'all to donate. All that money goes to the American Indian Community House, which is an organization that serves Indigenous communities in New York City. So I encourage y'all to give to the original caretakers of this land. So with that said, I'm gonna hop in. So first, starting off with intimate partner violence. This definition essentially says that domestic violence or intimate partner violence, I may use these terms interchangeably throughout the workshop. I know that more spaces are starting to use IPV, which is more focused on romantic relationships, whereas domestic violence is more expansive. You know, people think about family violence, child violence, and things like that. I tend to use domestic violence just because it's more familiar to the population that I work with. So domestic violence is a pattern, right? A pattern of physical, emotional, sexual, spiritual, and financial abuse that a partner uses to exert power and control over their partner. And domestic violence is maintained through us, right? It's maintained through our society, our culture, our laws, our institutions, and things like that. And so throughout this presentation, like I'll be using the term survivor and abuser, but I do want to note specifically for y'all as social workers that it's not a perfect dichotomy. So many abusers are survivors of violence, and a survivor can be abusive in a different relationship or in a different dynamic. So it's not a perfect dichotomy, but I will be using those terms just to make it easier for y'all to follow what I'm saying. So the most important part of the definition is the fact that domestic violence is a pattern, right? It's a pattern of abuse. And the problem with our legal system that we often see is that it's designed to address isolated events, right? So it'll take one event and look at only that situation and not the fuller context. And it's very easy for a survivor to look like an aggressor when a single incident is taken out of context. So since the DA is only focused on the isolated incident, oftentimes they'll refuse to intervene when someone who is both a survivor and a defendant were victims of a crime that they claim to care about. So for example, I have worked with survivors whose case was ongoing, and throughout their case, they were continuing to be abused by their abuser. And they would tell their defense attorney, tell the DA that this person is doing XYZ to me right now. Like I've had survivors with proof, right? Video, photos, audio recordings, all of the things that they say that you should have. And the DA will literally say, I don't care. Like, right, I only care about this one thing I'm charging you for. If you have another problem, then you need to go address that with NYPD. So while DAs claim to care about victims of crime, when the victim of crime is inconvenient to their agenda, they no longer care. And that's a huge problem with the system that we have now. So there are many different reasons why a survivor and an abuser might engage in the same behavior, right? They might do the same thing, usually to achieve completely different goals, which is why it's so problematic to take these things out of context, right? And so I'm gonna do like a little quick activity with y'all, which I call same behaviors. So I'm going to call out like an action, and then I want y'all to put in the chat why you think an abuser might do this. And then after we do that, we're gonna talk about why a survivor might do that. So again, throw your answers in the chat. So getting your partner drunk. Why might an abuser want to get their partner drunk? Right, to take advantage, take away their power. It's easier to control them, easier to manipulate them. All different things, right? It's all about power, right? To put the survivor in a vulnerable position, right? Compliant, to strip them of autonomy, to be able to do what they want with them. Why might a survivor want to get their abusive partner drunk? Yes, to distract them, to break free, to subdue them, to escape, to avoid abuse, right? Some people's partners may be nicer if they're drunk. It might be easier to run away if they get too drunk. Definitely to deflect. These are all great. To not get beaten. What about hiding a gun? Why might an abuser hide a gun? Right, secrecy, so the survivor doesn't know where it is. They might retaliate. Right, to induce fear and to threaten them, right? Because if the survivor doesn't know where the gun is, then they never know how close it is or how easily the person can get the gun. Right, to induce fear, to harm. Why might a survivor hide a gun? Self-defense, protection in case of an emergency. Right, exactly. To protect themselves from their abusive partner in case they need something. What about calling the police? Why might an abusive partner call the police? Right, to shift blame, to control the narrative, gaslight, to use the police to cause harm as a threat, right? If the survivor is, for example, undocumented, they could use that as a threat, right? To take away their children. So this is a quick activity, but these are just a couple examples. And the reason why I like to do this activity is just to show people how taking one action out of context is so irresponsible, right? So dangerous because a survivor could do something that looks suspicious to a DA for a completely different reason than an abusive partner might do that. And so, again, this is why it's so imperative to focus on the fact that abuse is a pattern. And a lot of y'all might be interacting with survivors of IPV. And I've found that with service providers and law enforcement, it's a lot harder for people to be able to determine who is the abusive partner and who is surviving violence in the relationship, especially if it's a queer relationship. People have a hard time determining if it's not a cis man and a cis woman. And so one thing that we utilize at STEPS, which I'm sure y'all have heard about throughout your program, is we ask ourselves whose life is getting smaller as the relationship progresses, right? As the relationship continues on, who is hanging out with their friends less? Who is talking to their families less? Who has less control of the money? Whose life is getting smaller and smaller as the relationship goes on? And that will tend to be able to answer and help with the different dynamics. Oops. Now moving on to set the stage for the prison industrial complex, which is also called the PIC. This definition here is from Critical Resistance, and it essentially talks about how the prison industrial complex is just a term that we use to describe all of the overlapping interests of, the prison industrial complex that are related to prisons. And so while we like Critical Resistance definition, I am going to do like a little mind mapping activity with y'all, just to point to the fact that the prison industrial complex can mean different things to different people. And over time, its definition can change, right? It has a lot of different parts and people that keep it going. So our understanding of it will continue to grow and change over time, and even for some people throughout this workshop. So in the chat, tell me who is affected by prisons. So when you think about prisons, who do you think of that's most affected? Right, poor communities, Black and brown communities, people of color, indigenous communities, trans people, right? The prisoners themselves, their families, their communities, right? Disabled folks, low income folks, right? There's people with mental health or substance use issues. Sex workers is a good one. Very often, like entire communities of people, right? For sex workers, for example, entire like professions, right? Children of people who are incarcerated, right? So not only people who are incarcerated, but they have families, they have communities, even prison guards, right? Towns. There are prison towns, right, where the entire town is employed by the prison. How about institutions? So what are some institutions that are connected to prisons? So I just named one, like local governments, right? Whose whole economy depends on the prison, for example. What are some other institutions? Police, that's a big one, right? Outside contractors. And that one people usually don't tend to focus on. People who contract for commissary, contract for phones, for all types of amenities. Universities is a big one. ICE, ACS, medical corporations. A lot of people don't even focus on that one. That's a good one. Right? Voting representation. It very, very much relates to during slavery. And what about career or industry? Who would be out of a job if we abolished prisons? Cops, law enforcement. So that includes prosecutors and attorney generals. Who else? Judges, right? Social workers, prison guards, right? Parole and probation. Some other ones I'm thinking of are like reentry nonprofits, for example, alternative to incarceration, ATI programs. So this is a little like graph that I made, and is by no means extensive, but very much, I think, off the top of my head was a lot of people that are connected. So in the center here, we have like jails, which is where people are held pre-trial, prisons where people go post-conviction, detention center, which is a word that the state uses to make jail sound nice, right? So like juvenile detention, AKA kid jail, immigrant detention, jail for immigrants. And I especially want to highlight the last part, psychiatric hospitals, because a lot of people don't think of psychiatric hospitals as carceral, but a lot of survivors of psychiatric institutions are starting to speak out about their experience. And when you think about it, it is a place where people are sent involuntarily for a set amount of time, sometimes indefinitely. Their entire life is controlled by the staff. And it's very, very carceral in that way. So I do want to challenge us to think about psychiatric hospitals as another iteration of prison for disabled people. So on this little like immediate outer circle, you have the people that directly get their money from the PIC. And so DAs, judges, private prison companies, ATI, law enforcement. I also want to highlight unions because I feel like, not all unions, but of course, but I feel like people do not pay attention enough to, for example, police unions, corrections unions, right? So for those of you who are familiar with New York State politics, when New York State passed bail reform and discovery reform last January, there was huge pushback from police unions and from the corrections unions. They were some of the loudest, and DAs were some of the loudest voices against reform, right? And so when we think about how much power these unions have, like police unions, for example, they literally negotiate murder in their contracts, right? So I definitely want us to think about the power that unions have and how much of a role they have in upkeeping the PIC. And on this outer circle here, we have people that are like more likely to be overlooked, right? So corporations, right? We have like Starbucks, Walmart, McDonald's, Verizon Wireless, all of these major corporations that use prison labor. We have social workers, which somebody stated. So a lot of social workers would be out of a job if we abolish the PIC. Colleges and universities, right? How many think tanks, colleges and universities and think tanks, think about how much resources and like research is put out about the PIC, how much reform, and how a lot of people who have a direct relation to the PIC are employed as professors at universities or directors of research centers. We have tech companies. So as the tech industry is taking over every other industry, of course, we're seeing things like ankle monitors, AKA e-shackles, right? Even me on my phone, I have an app for JPay so I can send commissary to people. So somebody made a lot of money designing that app. So slowly we're seeing the tech industry getting involved, right? We have Apple contracting with prisons to get iPads to prisoners and things like that. Construction companies, right? Media, a lot of people, I think, overlook the role that media plays in keeping up this image of the PIC. And how a lot of police officers, for example, have direct relationships with newspapers, right? They give them insiders, they give them stories. And so they have a close relationship with mainstream media, and especially so for corporate media. And we also have politicians, right? So some politicians, like, for example, Joe Biden, built his whole career off the PIC, right? Spent the 80s pushing the Republican and Democratic Party right on criminal justice, and then had his like time to shine in the 90s with the crime bill. And so that's just on a federal level. But imagine a local level politician now. Imagine how much clout that someone can garner just from fear mongering and utilizing the PIC. So now I want us to zoom out a little bit and think about like, what are some of the ideas, right? What are some of the like ideas that these people use that a Joe Biden or that a local politician or a police union would use to perpetuate the PIC? So I just use, for example, fear mongering. Another one that comes to mind is like racism. What are some other ideas that people use? Carceral logic. Right. So having police in our hearts and our minds, right, as they say. Individualizing poverty. Exactly. Making it seem like people have so much of a choice. Public safety. Pathologizing behavior. Carceral feminism, right? The mainstream IPV orgs that say they want to work with the police closer. Carceral healthcare. And we see this a lot with people who are disabled, right? They get held against their will for things like that. Right. So these are just a couple of the ideas, right? Like, what else? Transphobia, for example. A lot of these ideas are paramount to perpetuating the PIC, right? The PIC cannot run without these ideas. So in order to have such a big PIC here, there needs to be people to put in the prisons, right? As for those who are following No New Jails in New York City around the Close Rikers campaigns, they were saying, if they build it, they will fill it, right? If they spend all this money and energy building these jails, people need to be put in the jails. So criminals need to be created. And so what this long definition says is essentially that criminalization is a process, right? It's a process that society and the state uses to determine which behaviors should be punished. And this is done through several ways. So passage of laws, legislation, law enforcement, things like that. And while criminalization is framed as neutral, its enforcement is largely determined by race, immigration status, ability, socioeconomic status, gender, ability, things like that. And it's actually this neutral framework that opens the door for increased marginalization. So when I say that, I'm thinking about, for example, mandatory minimums, right? During the like tough on crime era in the 1990s, mandatory minimums came about to essentially neutralize the criminal justice system, right? The government essentially was like, yeah, we know there's so much racism. We don't want Black people to get caught. We don't want Black and Indigenous folks and trans folks to get caught up in this. So let's just put mandatory minimums. So no matter who you are, if you commit X crime, right? Let's say attempted murder. Let's say if you commit attempted murder in XYZ state, you automatically get 15 years, whether you're Black or white or Asian or straight or whatever. However, what happens is that now you just have more marginalized people serving more time because there's a mandatory minimum, right? Because you can't account just for one, component of the PIC. You can't just say, we're going to neutralize this on the back end, right? And not the front end. Because what happens is police have discretion, right? So if someone commits attempted murder and it's someone they like or someone they know, they can just be like, I'm not going to arrest this person. And DAs have discretion. So what we saw with mandatory minimums was that DAs just wouldn't charge people with that. So they might charge a Black trans woman with attempted murder, and now she has this mandatory minimum. And then if let's say a white cis straight person has done the same thing, they might charge them with assault with a deadly weapon instead. That way, the mandatory minimum doesn't apply to them. So again, when we think about criminalization as neutral, there's way too much. It's so big and there's so much discretion that one component of it can't just be accounted for. So stereotypes actually play a huge role in criminalization, right? Because like I said, you have to create criminals. And so creating criminals kind of serves two purposes. One is to fuel this state of anxiety and fear so that people feel okay with what's going on, right? People feel okay with the violence, the torture, the enslavement, loss of rights. So for example, if the general public can be convinced that all Muslims have the potential to be terrorists, then when George Bush starts rounding up thousands and thousands of Muslims and deporting them and indefinitely incarcerating them and torturing them, people feel like it's justified because of the fear and anxiety and all of these feelings that people have created. Also, creating criminals is used to justify the system, like I said. So in order for the United States to be the largest incarcerator in the world, people need to feel like there's a reason. People need to feel like that's justified. And so that's why you have, despite the fact, think about like the end of the Civil War, right? The abolishment of chattel slavery, allegedly, in 1865. And when the prison system exploded, right? From that point to now, somehow we still have the exact same populations targeted through these ongoing practices, right? So despite the fact that all of the laws have changed, the criminal legal system has changed, we still have the same people that are being run through the system. And like I said, stereotypes play a huge role in that. So I'm going to do like a little case study with y'all, utilizing like a reference from pop culture. And so what I'm going to show you how easily stereotypes and framing can make you disbelieve a survivor, someone that you know is a survivor, because this is essentially what prosecutors do to survivors to get a conviction or a plea. They will know for a fact someone is a survivor, and they will utilize these stereotypes, right? Like the angry Black woman, the spicy Latina, the Muslim terrorist. They'll utilize stereotypes to frame the story in a certain light so that they can be able to get a conviction or be able to pressure the survivor to plead. So I'm going to be using the example of Lisa Lopez, who was also known as Left Eye in the girl group TLC, one of the most successful girl groups of all time. I know I'm aging myself here, so shout out to my millennials. TLC rose to fame in the early 1990s, probably around like 92. And they actually sustained continued success until 2002, when Lopez died tragically in a car accident in Honduras. So Lopez, there was 3 members in the group, and Lopez was known as the crazy one in the group. And the record label even played on this for the band's album Crazy Sexy Cool, where crazy was meant to be a reference to Lopez. And she had a lot of trouble throughout the group's tenure. So Lopez was in a relationship with NFL star Andre Rison. They started dating right when TLC came out, and they dated all the way up until her death. So the whole time she was famous, she was dating Andre Rison, and they were in an abusive relationship. So, like I said, she had a lot of trouble throughout their tenure as a group. Her and the other two bandmates got into it, and they referred to her as aggressive. They referred to her as controlling. They said that she was the reason why the group was having issues. There was a point in time where she went missing, right? There was a press conference. She was supposed to be there. She went missing. Law enforcement went looking for her. She had a history of alcoholism, and she also had a history of self-harm. And she had even carved into her arm with a razor, "I hate Dre," which is what she called her partner, Andre. And so for those of us, all of y'all as social workers and myself as a counselor, knowing that she was in an abusive relationship with Rison the entire time that she was famous, we can guess that this relationship likely played a huge role in what went on, right? So we can guess that her being in an abusive relationship did strain the relationship with her bandmates, right? And that it did cause her alcoholism to cope. Clearly, it played a role in her self-harm because she carved that she hated him in her arm. So, those of us who are more aware, we can pretty much see what's going on and be able to determine that this relationship was causing a lot of harm to her. Now, it was not a secret that Rison and Lopez were in an abusive relationship. And he abused her the entire time they were together. So she described some of their abuse as he would slap her, he would shoot at her with his gun, threaten her at gunpoint. She wasn't allowed to leave the house without asking. He constantly cheated on her. He was described as jealous, possessive. She had to ask permission to do things. She had to ask permission to hang out with her friends. She was often seen by her loved ones with bruises, cuts, black eyes, and things like that. In fact, Rison had previously had an issue where he was arrested for beating up Lopez in public. And when somebody tried to help her or take her away from the situation, he shot his gun in the air to threaten them. So again, it was very well known that they were in an abusive relationship. So this video that I'm about to show y'all pertains to like a hot topic in pop culture at the time, when Lopez accidentally burned Rison's house down. And this happened in 1994. So I'm gonna tell y'all the story, and then I'm gonna play y'all the video, and I want you to pay attention to different things in the video as you watch it. So essentially what happened is Lopez and Rison went out separately. They went out with their friends. They came home around the same time, very, very early in the morning. So when they came home, he began to question her, and it escalated into this argument. This argument ended in Rison beating Lopez pretty bad. He left bruises, scratches, blood all over her face, all over her body. And so what happens is he beats Lopez. He decides he wants to take a walk and cool off. So he leaves the house and goes for a walk. Lopez is left in the house by herself. So she goes in the bathroom and she sees her face. She sees all the bruises. She sees everything, all the blood. And she thinks to herself, like, oh my God, this man, I'm going to kill this man, right? Like, if he doesn't kill me first, I'm going to kill him. And so she takes some of his shoes, she puts them in the bathtub, and she lights them on fire. She leaves the bathroom to go outside to go bang the windows out of his car, right? And while she's doing that, the fire loses control and the entire house ends up burning down. Neither Rison nor Lopez was in the house at the time. And Rison was charged with arson and incarcerated at a psychiatric hospital as a result of this. So I'm going to show y'all a video. And when y'all watch this video, I want you to be thinking about like everything we just heard, right? And think about what is coming up for you as you watch this video. How is the music instructing you to feel? What's the language that's being used? How is this being framed? Do you feel a certain way about her as you watch the video? So I want y'all to be thinking about that as you watch.
Imagine if one of the world's biggest pop stars burned down an NFL superstar's house. Can you imagine how social media would react to that? Believe it or not, it actually did happen 25 years ago. Andre Rison was one of the NFL's best wide receivers. He was a Super Bowl champion, a 5-time Pro Bowler, and he caught over 10,000 yards in his career, the majority of them with the Atlanta Falcons. In 1995, he signed a deal making him the highest paid receiver in the history of the league, and he was dating Lisa Left Eye Lopez, a member of TLC, one of the most iconic hip-hop groups of all time. It's harder to think of a bigger celebrity power couple in the mid-90s than these two, but despite their mutual success, below the surface, the relationship was swarming with anger and violence. In September 1993, Rizin and Lopez were both arrested following a domestic dispute outside an Atlanta nightclub. Rizin had allegedly assaulted Lopez and fired a gun in the air, while Lopez attacked a police officer. Charges against Rizin were eventually dropped, and Lopez pled guilty to a 3-day suspended sentence. Despite the incident, Rizin and Lopez remained together, but their relationship became more and more unhealthy. Then, on the morning of June 9th, 1994, it went up in flames, literally. Around 5 a.m., Rizin and Lopez got into an enormous fight after the Falcons receiver came home from a night of clubbing. Lopez was reportedly furious Rizin had recently bought a ton of expensive sneakers and not gotten her any as a gift. What followed was an ugly he said, she said. Lopez says Rizin beat her. Rizin claimed Lopez was drunk and he was acting in self-defense after she hit him first. Eventually, Rizin left the house to take a long walk. While Rizin was gone, Lopez took his new sneakers, put them in his bathtub, and set them on fire. But she was unable to contain the flames once they started, and by morning the entire mansion had burned down. A day later, Lopez was arrested and charged with arson. She ultimately got off with a small fine and probation. To this day, it will go down as one of the most insane celebrity couple fights in history. Unbelievably, Rizin and Lopez remained together still even after burning their house down. The two continued their relationship for years to come, and were even planning on getting married, until Lopez was tragically killed in a car accident in Honduras in 2002. The incident has largely faded from pop culture in the 2 decades since, but for one summer night in 1994, there was no crazier story in the world of sports or entertainment than this one.
So, what came up for you while watching that video? I already see some really good answers. So, they describe it as insane, right? It does very much sound like what happened with Chris Brown and Rihanna, especially the framing. So, you have like couple fights, right? What a crazy celebrity fight. Tries to, right, horrible use of language. Made it seem very normal, right? The music gets very uplifted at the end. It's like, oh, even though she like burned their house down, they stayed together. And it's like, what? Very, yeah, he said, she said, allegedly. His career is emphasized, right? They talk about his Super Bowls, his rings, this and that, saying she got off, right? So there's something going on here with the framing. No mention of abuse at all. And I don't know if some of y'all noticed, but in her mugshot, you can see a huge bruise on her lip. Yes, it tries to make it frame it like both of them need to take accountability. It's justified when the abuse is mentioned, right? It's like, oh, he allegedly did this, but Lopez attacked the officer and she got, even think about that, the first instance, she got a 3-day suspended sentence and his charges were dropped. So yeah, it says their relationship was filled with violence as if it was both sides. Even, I don't know if y'all notice how they try to say that she was jealous that he didn't buy her any shoes and she burned their house down, right? Like who would do that? Like those of us, y'all who are in social work, can really think, who is going to burn an entire house down because they were jealous about some shoes? Like that doesn't even make sense. Her behavior is pathologized, right? So there's clearly this framing that is meant to, as someone said, play into like the female hysteric narrative, right? To make her seem crazy. And so for those of us, like knowing what we know, we can see that the video is trying to push the audience to feel a certain way. And the reason I show this is because this is what district attorneys do to survivors. They take this isolated incident, they erase everything that happened before and after, and they just frame it as if this person is crazy, right? Because it's easy to feel after watching that video, oh, well, she shouldn't have burned his house down. When you're thinking like, he shouldn't have beat her up. Like they wouldn't have even been in that situation had he not been abusing her. And yet that's not stressed at all. So, right, media does. It really creates and shapes our reality and how we understand things. Like a lot of y'all noted, they didn't even mention abuse in. They were just like, allegedly, Lopez says that he beat her, but he says she was drunk. So they're playing on her alcoholism. So for those of y'all that are interested in this story, I'm going to drop a link to a better video that you can watch in your own time. The reason why that I like that video better is because you get to hear from Lopez herself, right? They take her words, her interviews, and she talks about her experience as a survivor. So I encourage anyone who's interested in that story, in the real story, to watch that video. So these are some common ways that survivors are criminalized. And we see these a lot in our work. So criminal possession of a firearm. And we talked about this a bit earlier when we spoke about why a survivor might hide a gun. I have seen this so many times in my work where a survivor will hide their abuser's gun and then will end up getting a gun charge, right? And they'll say, well, you shouldn't have touched it. Your fingerprints are on it, blah, 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 blah. Some of y'all might be familiar with the story of Marissa Alexander, who fired a warning shot when her abuser came to her house and ended up serving a lot of time in prison for that. We have possession of controlled substance, so a drug possession. Many survivors use substances to cope with their ongoing abuse. And some survivors, and I've seen this in my work more often with sex workers or people who are involved in that work, where their pimp or an abuser might force them to sell drugs for them. The same goes with like money crimes. So robbery, grand larceny, fraud, petty larceny. We have worked with a lot of survivors who were forced to steal, right? Their abuser forced them to steal, either so that they could resell the things that they stole or so that they could just have nice things. And also a lot of survivors will steal or commit fraud to escape financial abuse, right? So many survivors are not even allowed to work. Their abuser says they're not allowed to work. Some survivors work and their paycheck gets direct deposited into their abuser's account. Some people, they have to account for every single penny. So sometimes survivors will commit these money crimes, right, to escape financial abuse. We also have assault. So these last three bullets are ones that we see very often at STEPS. Assault with a deadly weapon. So I have seen this a lot. And actually, this scenario I'm about to describe to y'all, I have seen this so many times. Like this is so common where a survivor will be in their kitchen, right? They're either cooking, they're about to cook, they're in their kitchen for whatever reason. An abuser comes into the kitchen and either strikes them, will grab them, will pull up on them extremely aggressively. And a survivor will take a knife and basically be like, get away from me, right? Something like that can be an assault charge because what happens is abusers will call the police and be like, she threatened me with a knife, she stabbed me with a knife. We've even had a lot of situations where abusers will scratch themselves with knives to say that a survivor did that. And so we talked a little bit about DAs. One, for those who are a little unfamiliar with the criminal legal system, DAs are extremely good for overcharging, right? So an assault with a deadly weapon can turn into attempted murder like that. And we'll see that very often. And we'll often see murder, right? And a lot of times this happens in a scuffle for a weapon. So for example, a survivor that we are supporting as Survived and Punished right now is Tracy McCarter. And she is still being charged with murder because her abuser pulled up on her with a weapon. They were fighting over the weapon and he ended up dying. We've also seen this with guns, right? With people will be fighting over a gun and the gun will go off. And the survivor will be charged with murder. And so, we work with people with very serious charges at STEPS, like felony murder charges, right? Murder with intent, these things like this. And a lot of times it comes from a survivor defending herself. It comes from a situation where if they had not killed their abuser in that scenario or in that scuffle, they would have died. So it's a lose-lose situation for survivors. And I also, while I don't have on here, I did see some people in the chat mentioning, I do want to also stress probation and parole, because probation and parole is becoming one of the biggest methods of incarceration. Slowly but surely, violations are putting people, more and more people in the system. And the reason for this is once you have a record, it is so easy to get pulled back into the system because there's so many rules, right? Where you can live, who you can live with, who you can be friends with, where you can hang out, where you can work, how often you can work, when you can see your kids, when you can go to the grocery store, things like that. Like, it is so hard to follow. And we have seen a lot of survivors, right? Exactly, just like the Black codes. And we have seen a lot of survivors be in prison for a parole violation for example, violating curfew. So there have been several times where we supported people who they weren't at their stated address at when they were supposed to be, right? So we worked with somebody who wasn't at her stated address. She was supposed to be at her address at a certain time. Let's make up a time, 8 p.m., right? Around 9-10 p.m., her abuser, they get into an argument and he becomes aggressive. He's beating her, threatens to kill her. She runs out. That, when parole checks on you and you're not there, that is a violation. So running away from abuse can get you back in prison. And that's just one example. And for people who are predicates, right, people who already have a felony conviction, especially if it is a violent conviction. And I do want to stress that the term violent conviction doesn't mean that somebody was hurt. It just is a category, honestly, pretty arbitrary, that the state says these are considered violent and these aren't. So when I say violent, that doesn't mean somebody was hurt. But somebody who is a violent criminal, right, a violent predicate, now they get more time. And it's very easy for abusers to manipulate that. So at STEPS, we call it systems abuse, where an abuser might know that their partner, right, has, let's say, a firearm, right, a former like firearm conviction, which is considered violent in some states. They might be like, I'm going to call the police and tell them XYZ, because they know not only could that person be charged, but they could be charged more, right? Because if you're a violent predicate, now they're going to punish you for being a reoffender. And so honestly, people who are felons, people who have served time, are more vulnerable because there's this extra like coercive component to the relationship. The same obviously can be said for undocumented immigrants, even documented immigrants, right? Sex workers. So, I just put all of these here to show y'all that it's not one thing, right? It's not one charge that's rounding up all the survivors. It's not one court system that's getting all these survivors in the system. It is the entire system. As we saw, Lopez was charged with arson. So clearly, survivors are swept through the system using any and everything. So I want to do some myth bunking with y'all. And this is a pretty hip group, so I definitely have some high expectations here. So I'm going to show y'all a statement, and I want y'all to tell me like your initial thoughts, right? Why could this be a myth? Who perpetuates this idea? What institution legitimizes this idea, right? What institution tells us this thing is true? So the first one, a parent should be punished if they do not protect their children from abuse. ACS, right? ACS is huge, and Child Protective Services, CPS, child welfare, which is what we call it, Survived and Punished, the family regulation system, right? They push this notion that if you don't protect your child from abuse, you are a bad parent. And what we see is often parent survivors are blamed more for not protecting their children from abuse more than the abuser themselves. And this is especially true if the abuser is a cis man. So if a parent is being abused themselves, how can they easily protect their child, right? People, oftentimes women, are criminalized for not protecting their child from abuse to the same extent or even harsher than the abuser is, right? The carceral system. So DAs will bring up, it was in front of their children. We worked with somebody who very similar to Marissa Alexander, very similar case, and ended up getting custody taken away because their kids were there. Very similar again to Marissa Alexander. And so we have worked with so many people where the survivor will have an ACS case, will have a family court case, will be at risk of losing their children. And the abuser, which typically in this case is the father, will be like just chilling, right? No case, no ACS, no mandated programs, just living life, while the mom who was being abused is being punished for being abused. Most sexual assaults are committed by strangers. False to the false crying. Right. This is definitely false. And I think I would say the institution that legitimizes this the most is probably the media, right? Like we always hearing these like stranger danger conversations and things like that. Hollywood, yep, plays a huge role. Right. The stat is so small. The vast majority of sexual assaults are committed by someone that the person knows. And for children, this is like in the 90th percentile, right? 90 something percent of child sexual assault survivors were assaulted by somebody that they know. And oftentimes people are afraid of assaults in the street. They're afraid of like street-based assaults. And they develop these precautions and these safety plans for this specific scenario. But we don't have strategies or resources at large for addressing when people are most vulnerable for assault, right? Like we don't give people the tools that they need to be able to deal with the situation when they're being assaulted by someone that they know. Prosecutions are effective strategies to hold people who do harm accountable. Oh, right. Schools often perpetuate that myth too. Prosecutors, right? Prosecutors have a huge role to play in this, right? Because they want to keep their job. And so the vast Hollywood, right? We have all these movies, right? We have Law and Order for any Criminal Minds fans out there. We have like Aaron Hotchner is a former prosecutor, right? Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Conservatives very much push this narrative. And I would argue liberals as well. There's a prosecutor running for vice president right now, right? On the liberal ticket. And so the vast majority of cases are not even reported. And those that are reported, very few of them are prosecuted, and fewer of those are convicted, right? So the point of this is just to trouble the assumption that prosecution is the most effective way to address gender violence, right? And I see someone here talking about progressive DAs. And I was not going to bring this up, but since someone else brought it up, I do want to stress to y'all that there is no such thing as a progressive prosecutor. There is no way to like progressively put people in cages and separate kids from their parents. There's no way to do that in a progressive way. That does not exist. So thank you for bringing that up, but I do want to stress that. With the increased awareness about domestic violence and improvements in the legal system, it is much easier for survivors to receive protection. So I would definitely say law enforcement plays into this, because I went to a like domestic violence awareness thing for NYPD a few years ago, and they very much feel this way. Social workers, yep, nonprofits, right? So how many mainstream IPV organizations have this extremely close relationship with DAs and NYPD? Right. People don't even realize how hard it is to get OPs. It is extremely hard. And especially with coronavirus, politicians, right? And so actually what is wild about this is that mandatory arrest laws, which mainstream DV orgs pushed in the 90s, right? If someone makes a DV call to the police, then you have to arrest somebody. Mandatory arrest laws have actually led to an increase in death rates for, and this is especially so for Black women, right? So think about how wild that is, right? Mandatory arrest laws have led to more Black women survivors dying. Survivors themselves are often arrested under mandatory arrest laws. So I cannot tell you how many people that we've worked with, both at STEPS and at Survived and Punished, who were the ones that called the police. Like they were like, I literally called the police for help. They showed up and I got arrested. And the police are not actually required to protect people from abuse, right? They actually don't have to. The police themselves have disproportionately high rates of IPV. Right. Someone just said police at 40 are 40% more likely to perpetuate abuse, right? So we have abusers, right, who are supposed to be responding to calls of abuse. And lastly, A survivor should always immediately report an assault to the police. Obviously, the police feel this way. I would definitely argue DAs push this a lot. So many DAs have told our clients, well, why didn't you go to the police? Oh, well, if he's abusing you right now, then you need to go to the police, right? It's weaponized against them. And there are so many unintended consequences to reporting to the police, right? Hospitals, college campuses and schools. Like oftentimes, for some people have procedures where you can't even file a report with the institution unless you have a police report. And so again, there's so many unintended consequences, especially depending on someone's status. So sex workers are often arrested if they report sexual assault. Undocumented people risk deportation if they report. And the police themselves perpetuate gender violence, especially for trans people. So the point of this is just to shed light on why some people might not call the police. Some people don't feel like there is an alternative, so they fight back, right? They have nothing else. They're like, I'm gonna try to figure this out myself. Family members, yes, someone said family members. A lot of family members. Well, why don't you go to the police? Apologists. Right, exactly what Emily said. When it's not perceived as timely, then they'll try to argue, oh, well, you don't remember. So I wanted to include this section specifically about social workers because, again, y'all have a huge role to play in the fight against abolition. And I say that on both sides, for abolition and against abolition. So I have this quote here, and this quote is from the Social Service Workers United Chicago. I'm going to drop the link to the whole letter because it's so good. It's pretty long, but I definitely encourage y'all to read it. So I'm going to read this quote, and it says, the paradox is that if the National Association of Social Work and the social work profession truly committed itself to deconstructing systemic racism, it would result in the end of social work profession as we know it. Many social workers work in settings where clients are being held or treated involuntarily. So jails, right? Prisons, detention centers, psychiatric hospitals, court-ordered drug treatments, mandatory meetings with family regulation system. All of these care settings require social workers to actively disregard the mandate that we respect an individual's right to self-determination, right? So how can you respect someone's right to self-determination when you're forcing them to do something? That doesn't make sense. So again, I encourage y'all to read that whole thing because it's really good. And so a lot of y'all are going to be interacting with criminalized survivors in your setting. So I want people to throw out in the chat, where might social workers interact with criminalized survivors? Obviously, one we've said it's jails and prisons, but where else? Because criminalized survivors are everywhere. Nonprofits, right? ATI nonprofits, reentry nonprofits, right? Violence interruption programs, rehab, schools, right? There are young criminalized survivors. Courts, the criminal system at large, transitional nonprofits, hospitals, shelters, private practices, right? So these are also the ones I included, right? DA's offices, parole and probation office, police departments, right? There's a call to put more social workers in PDs, drug treatment programs, right? And so I wanted to just do this to show y'all that no matter what field you're in, it's very likely that you will come across criminalized survivors, especially if you're working with communities of color. Right, NGOs that contract with courts, exactly, often overlooked. And so survivors are everywhere, right? We've had survivors arrested at a DV shelter, right? Arrested at a program. Went to an immigrant rights organization for help and they couldn't help them. So I especially want y'all to be thinking about how can you make your programs accessible to criminalized survivors? So for example, one conversation that STEPS has been having with the family justice centers is the fact that they are co-located with the DA, right? Like let's say I want to go to Bronx FJC, right? Or Brooklyn FJC. Because it's co-located with the district attorney, there's mad court officers, state officers, and NYPD all in the building. I come in, I have to give my ID to the security, and what do they do with it? They scan your name for warrants because it's the DA's office. So This is the major hub for IPV programming and resources in the city. And what does it mean that if I'm getting beaten and I have a warrant, I can't come to you anymore because you're going to arrest me? So that's just one example, but I want us all, and you all especially, as you go out into your careers, to think about, is your program accessible to criminalized survivors? Can they even get into the building without having to be triggered by security? Can they access your services if they are court involved, right? And do you have staff, do you have people in the agency that know what criminalized survivors are going through? So these are some common instances of harm. And so a lot of the people that we work with have a lot of interaction with social workers in different settings. And a lot of people are greatly harmed by social workers. And so I wanted to just pull out some themes that I've seen over my time working with criminalized survivors to point out all of the different ways that social workers are in a position to harm criminalized survivors. And so the first one I have here, and we've talked about this a lot throughout this presentation, is separating families. You all are in one of the best social work programs in the country, right? Some of y'all took out loans to be here. Y'all are putting a lot of work into this. Please do not take out loans, go to school for years just to separate people from their families for a living. Do not do that. Oftentimes, ACS is called on people. This is especially true for Black and Indigenous mothers. They call ACS for neglect when the problem is actually poverty. And somebody brought this example up in the chat earlier. I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was, but somebody talked about how, like, leaving your kids, right? For example, leaving your kids in the car during an interview counts as neglect. But what that means is this person can't afford childcare, right? If I can't afford childcare and I need employment for parole, then I have to take them with me, right? Kids, for example, who have asthma, but they don't have access to their prescription medicine. So parents who don't give their kids prescription medicine that they need, that's considered neglect. How can that be considered neglect in a country where there's no access to healthcare, right? We don't have universal healthcare, and those who do have healthcare can't afford it. And so, people are going into debt, going bankrupt to be able to, afford healthcare, get the things that they need. So what does it mean to call ACS for neglect when someone just can't afford healthcare? We've also seen this in schools, right? When a child is chronically hungry, the child comes to school and they're always hungry. The family cannot afford food, very obviously, right? But we'll have social workers call ACS because the child is hungry. And the same goes for clothing. If a child is not appropriately dressed for the weather, then the parent may be accused of neglect, when very clearly that parent cannot afford clothes. And this is especially true for younger kids, right? Because kids will grow so much between ages like 2 and 5. And some parents can't afford to keep up with all the different size changes. And so, again, what does it mean to call ACS? Because think about what happens when a child gets taken away from their family, right? The child gets taken away, put in foster care with another family, and the state will literally give that family money to take care of that child. Like, imagine if we gave that money to the original parent. So many kids who have gone through foster care are speaking out and saying that a lot of kids, not all of course, but some kids feel like they would have been better off if they had just stayed with their parents. Because I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with what happens in foster care. They don't call it the foster care to prison pipeline for no reason, right? Sexual abuse is rampant and things like that. So imagine if instead of paying another family to take care of a poor person's family, if we just gave that family money to take care of their child. So again, and we also talked about punishing survivors for not keeping their kids safe. Another thing is making promises that can't be kept. And so I see this happen with service providers so often. And I just want to point out that specifically with criminalized survivors, but this can be applied to a bunch of different populations, but a lot of times we are working with some of the most vulnerable people, right? Everything is on the line. Their kids are on the line, their families, their careers, their hopes, their dreams. For people who are older and are facing a lot of time, the rest of their life is on the line. And it can be so traumatizing for someone to get their hopes up just to be let down. And so I encourage social workers, especially, and other people who are in counseling and social services, to just be as transparent as possible, right? You can say something like, yeah, the last time I did this, it worked, but no promises, right? Or I can't guarantee, but I'm going to try my best. I'm going to send this to this person. I don't know what they're going to say. Be transparent, because especially in the carceral system, we don't have power, right? I can present the greatest case in the world. And if the judge is like, no, then there's nothing I can do about that. And so I want us to think about being transparent with people, especially criminalized survivors, and not getting their hopes up just to crush it. Because I've heard so many people tell a survivor, yeah, you're definitely going to get a program. Like, the judge is definitely going to let you get this ATI program. And then they're sitting at Rikers for another year and wondering what happened. Another thing is gatekeeping. So social workers are often gatekeepers of life-saving programs for very vulnerable people. And I think it's easy to like overlook, because the social work profession is so undermined and is so underappreciated. And social workers are overworked and underpaid, that people don't appreciate the power, right? The amount of power that social workers have. So for example, not approving somebody for an ATI placement for no reason, right? So I've had instances where, for example, I was working with someone who had a really bad drug addiction. She had been in and out of prison for decades. And finally, the prosecutor and the DA were like, okay, the DA and the judge, my bad, were like, okay, we're going to let you have a program this time. Like, if you can get a program, we'll let you go. And what happened was she got denied a drug treatment program. And the social worker emailed me to tell me that she was denied because, quote, she has a bad attitude. Now think about what that means. Like, how much are you centering yourself in this person's life? And of course, she was a Black woman. So we can guess how her race perceived into her attitude, right? And so again, y'all are gatekeepers of life-saving programs, right? So centering yourself, just because you don't like someone, that doesn't mean the rest of their life needs to be over, right? You don't have to get along with everyone you work with, and you don't have to like everyone in your program. Another thing is neglecting to do paperwork. So it's a very, very similar case where I was working with someone who had a really bad drug addiction for decades, in and out of prison. And for the first time in her life, the judge and the DA were like, you know what? We're going to give you a program. Like, we're going to give you a chance to actually fix your addiction and, you know, rebuild your relationships and rebuild your life. And what happened was she allegedly got approved for a program. Months went by. No paperwork was done. They weren't answering emails. They kept dodging phone calls saying, oh, we'll have it soon. Months and months go by with no paperwork shown to the court. And the judge, after a certain amount of months, was like, you know what? Never mind. You're going to prison, because I'm not waiting on this. So she literally had to go to prison because a social worker failed to complete her paperwork. And so I say that to say, ask for help when you need it, right? Like I said, I know social workers are overworked. Tell your supervisor, like, yo, I have a lot going on. Can you help me? Ask your coworkers for help, because these things, while they seem small, they can affect the entire trajectory of people's lives. Here I also have mandated reporting. And so mandated reporting is like the state rallying everyone into being police, right? It actually very much reminds me of like during slavery, when the South said that any white person can stop and arrest a Black person. Like, that reminds me of that. And so there is lots of evidence out that shows that universal mandated reporting does not correlate with the likelihood of identifying child abuse. Mandated reporting disproportionately affects Black and Indigenous families, and it makes survivors less likely to seek help, right? Survivors don't want to disclose because they're like, you might get my kids taken away, or you might get me arrested. And so another thing is that the group of people that is actually more likely than anyone else to encounter signs of child abuse is physicians, right? Physicians are more likely than anyone else to be able to see signs of child abuse. But the inefficiency comes in because physicians often don't report, right? They don't report because they feel like Child Protective Services is not going to make things better. And some of them think that Child Protective Services is actually going to make things worse. And when they do report, right? So when physicians actually do report, they usually report Black and Indigenous families for abuse when abuse isn't occurring. So when they see abuse happening, like presumably in a white family or a wealthy family, they don't want to get CPS involved because they might make it worse. But when they see something where abuse isn't happening, but maybe they're just suspicious, right? And it's a Black or Indigenous poor family, then they'll be more likely to call. So again, mandated reporting really doesn't have an effect on identifying child abuse. And many social workers now are actually speaking out against mandated reporting. And there's lots of movements going on to basically get rid of mandated reporting laws and rules. So I encourage y'all to look into that and see if you can get plugged in. Lastly, here I have trauma informed. And so trauma informed has become like a buzzword, I think, in like social service spaces, but rarely do I actually see social workers adopt a trauma informed praxis, right? Because to be trauma informed means that you have to adapt to trauma no matter what it looks like. It doesn't mean just if someone's sad or someone's crying. Some people are pissed off. Some people are mad about what they had to go through. Some people are frustrated, right? And that is their trauma. And we need to be able to deal with people when they're angry, right? Some people, their trauma looks like showing up late, not showing at all, being unreliable, right? We need to be able to account for that. We can't just be like, well, Your Honor, they came 2 minutes late, so they're not compliant with the program. Like, what does that do for people? That is not trauma informed. We cannot, right? Procrastination is a big one. We cannot dictate what people's trauma looks like. And oftentimes people may, as social workers, you have to be able to determine when something is about you and when something is not, right? I've had survivors that I work with get very upset with me. And I was able to tell, like, you know what? This actually has nothing to do with me. You're upset about something else. And I'm going to hold that space for you. You know what I'm saying? So I definitely want to challenge y'all as social workers, not only to adopt a real trauma-informed practice yourselves, but to push your classmates, push your professors, push your coworkers, because trauma-informed is becoming like one of those terms that people use, and it's just becoming void of meaning because people want to dictate what people's trauma looks like. So get involved. This is the fun part. So I'm going to show y'all this video, and it's about the Defund the Police movement that Mariame Kaba, who founded Survived and Punished New York, actually just released maybe a week or two ago. So
people have a lot of
oh no, where'd it go?
Opinions about policing. People have a lot of opinions about policing. And our ideas about policing are shaped by our race, our genders, our class, and our parents. For example, most white people have very little interaction with police. In a recent study, 77% of white people had no contact with police in the previous year. Of those who did, at least half were traffic stops. And in many cases, white people initiated contact by calling the police. Since they have little unwanted contact, many white people's opinions about policing are not based on personal experience. Dominant culture, especially mass media, sells us the image of officer-friendly, but whose experience is that actually based on? The same study found that Black people experience excessive force at the hands of police at more than twice the rate of white people. Did we have a just and equitable police force and something went wrong? No. Policing in the South emerged from the slave patrols in the 17 and 1800s that caught and returned runaway enslaved people. In the West, police departments were formed to keep Native people out of cities built by white settlers. And in the North, the first municipal police departments in the mid-1800s helped quash labor strikes and riots against the rich, and policed public spaces to conform to middle-class white morality around gender and sexuality and exclude poor, unhoused, or disabled people. Policing in the U.S. began as a system of economic, social, racial, patriarchal, and ableist control. And that is what it still is today. The truth is police don't do what most people think they do. Police spend more than half of their time responding to non-criminal calls and traffic issues, and only 1 to 3% of their time responding to violent crime calls. Police don't stop violence. They respond to violence that has already occurred, and they respond with their own threat of violence. And that response is not equitable. When people of color are involved, police often engage violently. Yet we spend an astronomical amount of money on the police. Over $100 billion a year. Let that sink in. The demand to defund the police is about minimizing the role and power of police in our society. It's about demanding that the government stop writing blank checks for racist control, containment, and punishment. Defunding the police is also about recognizing that police do not solve or address any social issues. They do not prevent harm. What if we took that $100 billion and invested it in our community? What if we had housing, access to healthy food and clean water, health care, healing, cooperative businesses, education, child care, parks, art, and community services? If you already have those things, great. But that's not the reality everywhere. Ask yourself, if we have the resources, why doesn't everyone have this?
So I just wanted to show that video because I do think that it is getting lost on some people how the defund movement is connected to survivors, right? Criminalized survivors' first contact with the criminal legal system is the police, right? All the survivors we worked with, they had to have been arrested at some point. And we also think about how dual arrest in cases of domestic violence has skyrocketed over the last 30 years, right? And this is especially true for queer couples where it almost feels like the automatic response of cops is to just dual arrest. And so again, it's cops that make these arrests and these judgments. It's cops that go into a situation and determine what's going on, who do I arrest? The real truth of the matter is that police don't care about domestic violence. You know, they don't have to care. And as we mentioned earlier, they have higher rates of IPV than the general population. And sexual misconduct is actually the second common form of police misconduct, right? So sexual misconduct, past excessive force, is the most common form of police misconduct. Imagine if we had like an IPV program or agency, right? A nonprofit, and most of the staff was beating their spouses, and sexual misconduct was one of the biggest reported misconduct in that agency. We would probably shut that program down, would we not? I imagine and I hope that we would. Additionally, domestic violence organizations and coalitions across the country have faced backlash from police departments for openly supporting Black Lives Matter. So I'm going to drop like a little link here so y'all can read this on your own time. But there are nonprofits across the country who have, where the DAs have severed ties with them, or, board members who are affiliated with the police will leave. And in some cases, loss of grants, right? So police have literally taken money away from domestic violence for supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. So how can we say that police care about DV when this is what they do? In New York City, for example, NYPD's budget is $6 billion, right? $6 billion with a B. Imagine what we could do with that money, right? The number one concern for not just criminalized survivors, but survivors at large is housing, right? We don't have enough housing. People need to be able to get out. They need to know that they have somewhere to go. I've worked with survivors who were on the New York City DV shelter waiting list for over a year and a half, right? And so imagine what could happen, the harm that could happen, and that did happen in that amount of time. So imagine how many DV shelters, how much affordable housing we could build with that $6 billion. We could have free childcare services. We could give petty cash to survivors. Like I've had to pay survivors' phone bills, groceries, all types of stuff. Imagine if we had petty cash to just give to people, Metro cards so that people can leave on a whim. What if we paid survivors court fees? And with that much money, we could really get to the root causes of IPV, right? We could address poverty and wealth inequality. We could get free treatment centers and health clinics, even better education. So again, while a lot of people are ignoring the way that the defund movement is connected to IPV at large, and carceral feminism has played a large role in that, it is very much connected. Like, imagine what we could do for survivors if we took all of that money away from NYPD. Court watching is another thing. So, I mean, obviously this is not as easy to do right now because of COVID, but sitting in arraignments or sitting in a particular judge's courtroom or something and gathering data, right? Who's coming through? What are they being offered? What is their bail? What is the DA saying, right? What is being factored into their case? A lot of this data and information can be used for a whole bunch of different things, right? So we can do like letter writing, electoral campaigns, teach-ins, press releases, all different types of things. Oh, someone asked what dual arrest. So dual arrest is when both parties are arrested in like a domestic violence case. So a lot of times when this happens, like I said, a lot with queer couples, is that domestic violence call will come in, cops will come, they'll say, oh, well, we don't know which one's a survivor or which one's the abusive partner because they're not cis, and they'll just arrest both people. Letter writing. So a lot of people very much undermine or don't realize just how important letter writing is. Incarcerated survivors have said again and again how important it is to their well-being. So letters are important strategies to build relationships and to organize coalitions. And it not only does it support the survivor, but it also shows corrections that this person has like a community, right? This person has someone looking out for them. You cannot just do something to this person and nobody will know, nobody will care. So we definitely want to be sending that message to corrections because people who are isolated, people who don't have anyone, are at the highest risk. And lastly, these are some organizations to support or join. So Survived and Punished is having like a little pause on new members right now, but we should be back within like a few months. But also Black and Pink focuses on queer survivors, and they actually, oh, someone just asked letter writing. Black and Pink has like a national letter writing like setup where they'll pair you with a pen pal. All their people they work with are queer, and then like the letter writing starts. So I would say if you're like a little nervous about picking someone, Black and Pink is a really good resource. RAP, releasing aging people in prison, right? COVID bailout, free them all. So I encourage y'all to check these orgs out or check out the hashtags because these are really good abolitionist orgs in New York City, except Critical Resistance is not. In New York City that are doing really good work. So this I wrote this article like maybe a few years ago. I don't remember when, but it's titled Why Caring About Domestic Violence Means Being an Abolitionist. And I encourage y'all who are a little unfamiliar with abolition to read. And that sums up this presentation. So in our last few minutes, I mean, I think we're at time. We could take any pressing questions, but I appreciate all y'all for sticking through, being engaging. This was very fun.
Thank you so much, Angel. I learned a lot from you in the last hour and a half. It felt like a semester class, honestly. So thank you, thank you. And are there any campaigns that we can get involved as students at Columbia? Defense campaigns or?
So there is, Survived and Punished has a defense campaign for a criminalized survivor right now named Tracy McCarter, and I brought her up a little bit earlier. She's being charged with murder. She actually goes to Columbia. She's in the nursing school. And so I can share with you after who to contact about getting involved in her. She actually Columbia had suspended her because of her case, but I think maybe last week finally like allowed her to come back to school. So there was a lot of pressure on Columbia, but now she's back. So I would definitely send that information because I think it would be dope for like some of her classmates, right? People who are in her community to be involved in the defense campaign. Oh, thank you, Ashley.
Also, like Angel said, if you have any pressing questions, please drop it in the chat right now. And then we'll just wait for that. And I'm going to launch the poll to see what students were here to, oh, I can't do that because then it will clear existing polling results. So never mind, I'm just going to not run that poll, but yeah, I do wish that this were a semester-long class as well. And if you want to be continuing your passion in what Angel talked about today, please check out Survived and Punished. It's both a national and local organization that you can get plugged into. And once again, Angel, thank you so much for having us. This recording will be available on our website in the next few weeks. Our team will be captioning the video, and then we'll post it for a month so that people can access it. And this is also going to be a webinar that you can use to get yourself accredited for the Sexual Respect Initiative course that you have to take at Columbia. So if that's something that you are looking for right now, this is considered as a mini course that you can take to fulfill that requirement. So thank you so much, Angel. And I guess there is one question from Emily. With family separation and mandated reporting in mind, are there any organizations for social workers who specifically work against those facets of what has been social workers' roles in the past?
Ooh, so the org that immediately comes to mind is Movement for Family Power. We're supposed to be, Survive and Punish is supposed to be doing some type of collaboration with them soon, but they are a really dope organization that is focused on the abolition of the family regulation system. So they're the first ones that come to mind on that. There was the Radical Social Work Group, but it dissolved, I think maybe a couple of years ago. But that's off the top of my head. But I also want to, because like I have a bunch of like links and stuff to some of the stuff I stated. So I'll likely send to Ashley like a little resource guide of some of the stuff I was talking about. So if y'all missed any of the links I dropped, you can have access to them. And I'll probably try to add like some specific orgs that are social work oriented.
That would be great. Thank you so much. Anything else from our co-MCs, Abby and Sanjana? Do you have anything that you would like to share?
I just want to say, Angel, thank you so much. That was such a brilliant presentation you did, and you delivered it so beautifully.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. No, thanks for having me, y'all. This was dope.
All right, so on that note, we will be ending our webinar today and stop recording. So everyone, please take care of yourself. I know it's a busy time of the year, and I look forward to having more workshops like this in every month in the next this school year. So yeah, and thank you to John Louis, who's my co-coordinator, and our PDSA staff members, Chris and Karma and Vida. And yeah, I'm going to end the webinar now, and looking forward to seeing this video on our website. Bye, everyone. Bye, Angel.